What's going on, guys? Welcome to Victims and Villains. If you guys are new to this channel, we create content talking about mental health through pop culture. My name's Captain Nostalgia. I'm one of the hosts of our Nicolas Cage podcast. That's high praise. And as a horror fan, I have been waiting a year to talk about this movie, Renfield. In this movie, Nicolas Cage plays Dracula. Nicholas Hoult plays is a familiar Renfield, which the movie's named after. And after centuries of being together, Renfield kind of gets an understanding of the toxicity that being Dracula's familiar has on his mental health, and he seeks out to kind of part ways, and through a chain of events draws near for the apocalypse. I'm going to start off just by saying there's a lot going into this movie, and the first 20 minutes of this movie, they hit you with so much. And yes, all of the stuff that they hit you with does eventually flesh out, but it is such an assault on all the senses for the first 15-20 minutes. Everything everywhere all at once kind of grew into that, but to shock your audience in it right out the get-go, that's ballsy. And I will say it does take some getting used to. It is kind of a jarring, interesting opening that they have. The first act is they're kind of laying out events. You kind of meet all of our critical characters: Nicolas Hoult, Nicolas Cage, Awkwafina, Ben Schwartz, and you kind of get to see how you're creating 4 different paths that are essentially assembling into one climactic ending. And honestly, I have a love-hate relationship when films kind of take that route, but I think it ends up working really well for Renfield. Nicolas Cage, of course, in this movie, playing Dracula, and the internet blew up with jokes about Robert Pattinson becoming the Batman after Twilight, talking about that being the longest vampire transition that ever took place. Allow me to introduce you to Vampire's Kiss, a movie made in 1989 where Nicolas Cage thinks that he is bitten by a vampire and thus taking on the responsibilities of a vampire. It is now 2023. That is a transition 34 years in the making. And maybe this is my bias as a Nicolas Cage fan, as a Nicolas Cage podcaster, but Cage as Dracula does not disappoint by any means. He brings that theatrical mannerisms that he's made a career of being famous for, sprinkles in a little bit of Bela Lugosi, is able to honor the past of what Universal has done with Lugosi, and forges a brand new path for a character that only Nicolas Cage can create. It has that same charisma that Lugosi had back in the 30s and 40s, but he makes him menacing enough. And from someone that genuinely loves Nicolas Cage, this might be one of his most chilling performances, because Nicolas Cage typically does not get into the shoes of a bad guy, and boy does he wear them well. I have a love-hate relationship with Nicolas Hoult in this movie, because in some aspects it feels like he's just taking his character from the X-Men universe and just kind of bringing him over to this film. I don't know, maybe he was a bad choice for this role. I think kind of stepping outside of my bias of that comparison, Hoult does a really good job in this movie. As much as I hate to admit it, I think he has a great chemistry with Awkwafina, but also on top of that, he just has a really well-balanced performance in this film. His character development is completely amazing. The fact that he's kind of able to go from this really timid guy in the beginning and to kind of find his strength by the end of the movie, I thought was really wonderfully done, and Hoult rises to the occasion for everything. Awkwafina, I always love seeing her. I think she's absolutely hilarious, and here she definitely doesn't disappoint. But also, I think you having her kind of have a little bit of aspect of the drama, kind of giving her character some really just a heartbreaking backstory allows her to kind of flex her muscles as an actress, not just as a comedian. This film kind of can feel a little bit too busy at times with the Ben Schwartz character and a lot of the baggage that he brings to this story. But like I said in the beginning of the review, I think a lot of that stuff does kind of work out well. He definitely feels like the most throwaway character out of everyone in here. But I will be darned if I did not talk about how menacing he can actually be. He's basically the secondary villain of the story, and again, Schwartz doesn't typically play characters like this, and kind of starts off really in the comedy territory and then kind of gets progressively darker as the film goes on. And again, he this is just a performance from Schwartz where you get to see his range as an actor. Dracula is one of the many pillars of kind of the foundation of the horror genre. And while the film definitely does embrace those horror roots, this film it just flows in and out of like the action and comedy along with the horror, just kind of to be this really unique, borderline like genre bending experience. Like, I was not expecting some of the action sequences to be akin to something like John Wick. They do a great job at the fight choreography for this. And while I won't say that everything is perfectly balanced, I would say the way that it flows in and out of these genres is just a really masterful thing for Chris McKay. The way that the action sequences are shot reminds me of like that church scene and some of the other scenes really from Kingsman, the Secret Service. I think McKay just has a really good eye for how to establish shots in those types of sequences. Those types of sequences also too really kind of go really lean into the camp and just kind of insanity of the body horror, and I really dug that. The blood and gore of this movie feels very much like Evil Dead 2 Army of Darkness. It's just very over the top, but it feels like it's delivered in a way that you would see someone like Sam Raimi or even Peter Jackson in their early careers deliver. Lots of creative gags here, and the death sequences and the action sequences all around are just an extreme fun and an already fun film. I've talked about horror comedies in the past, the way that they can feel like they lean into one portion of that genre as well. And while I won't say that the comedy is outweighed by the horror or vice versa, I definitely will say that this is a good representation of that, where it never feels like it leans too much into the scary. It definitely has those moments. Never leans too much into the comedy, but there's always an air of lightheartedness there, but the action sequences also lean into that comedy really well. So let's run this through the Rorschach rating scale, and you guys can find out if this movie is truly worthy of high praise, because guess what? You gotta come back for the podcast. That's right, I'm not gonna give a rating for this one at all. I am just gonna allow you guys to check out That's High Praise when we return this Wednesday, April 19th, talk about Renfield and find out if it is worthy of high praise. But while you're holding on to your hats in anticipation for the score, let's talk about mental health. And we're also not going to talk about mental health here as well, because this film is littered with mental health. Every character journey goes through mental health, and there's just way too much, and we really want to do this film the proper service that it is due. I just do not feel like a YouTube video talking about one point in an ocean of points is doing this film justice. Go check out Renfield, because we're going to talk about it in depth this upcoming Wednesday, April 19th, right here on YouTube and wherever you guys get your podcast from. Simply look up That's High Praise, a Nicolas Cage podcast, and subscribe. Enjoy your guys' weekend, and if you guys could not make it out to Horrific Hope Film Festival with us this weekend, we'll see you guys next year. Have a good night, and we'll see you guys next week.